Hello everyone, this is Rodin again, and we're going to be going through our second market training video for EVE Online. Basically, the first lesson that we went through was going through the kind of big picture items of market being a source of passive income in the game. So we're going to explore that a little bit more with today's lesson. Alright, so we're going to be going over specifically things to do before analyzing the charts or the market window, as far as where to buy and sell and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that actually kind of has to happen, or you need to be aware of before you really act on the actual activity of buying and selling items, like from large market hubs like Cheetah. So these are the kind of subtopics I'm going to be going over. I'm going to discuss talking about the myth about, isn't trading just buying low and selling high? We're going to talk about identifying demand, the supply picture, material logistics and other motivations, and determining will an item increase in value over time. Alright, so for the most part, if you're somewhat familiar with real life market subjects, this sounds a lot like fundamental analysis. And in a way it is. It's just I had to kind of tailor it more to how we see things in game. Alright, so it's very similar to real life, but not quite. So there's a little bit of a different angle to that. Okay. Alright, so we're going to go over the first subtopic here. We're going to be asking the question, isn't trading just buying low and selling high? Well, in short, no, it's not. It is probably the most outward facet of trading, of market, right? A lot of people, if you were to just ask the general question of, hey, how do I trade? People will basically just automatically, say, buy low, sell high. And a lot of times they say that without not really actually knowing what that actually means. Alright. So the actual act of purchasing stock, the buying low and selling high part of that, believe it or not, that's actually more towards the latter part of the entire process. Alright. A lot of things basically have to happen before you get to that point where you should feel comfortable actually buying something for the purpose of reselling it later for a profit. Alright, a lot of stuff should have happened already before you got there. So the act of purchasing stock is the result of analysis. Alright, we're going to be going over and breaking down the things that we, or at least I, look at before I actually buy anything in-game. So just bear in mind that a lot of things have to happen before you get to that point, okay? Failing to conduct analysis will cause you to act on incomplete information. Alright, so kind of going back to the question of, oh, I just buy low, sell high, right? And that's all I have to do. Is like, yeah, but if that's all you're doing, you kind of have to give yourself follow-up questions. How do I know that I actually am buying low? How do I know that I actually am selling at a point that I can extract profit? So you have to do your actual homework. You have to do analysis. You have to actually be familiar with the price action of the item and where it's going, so that you can actually act on buying low and selling high. Alright. And again, we'll go over the things to consider before you get to that point. And kind of just a general statement here. Being a good trader is a product of being a knowledgeable player. And that's so true. Alright, so so I'm definitely in that scene, alright? And I don't know of any other fellow trader or market person that does just market. I don't know of any other EVE player that literally just logs on to adjust orders in JITA. At least within my social circle, I've never met one. Alright. So being a good trader is, you need to actually know how to play the game and play it at a level that is at least slightly above average across the board. You have to have an actual working knowledge of how the game works. Otherwise, your analysis will not be founded on actual facts or experience. It will just be hypothesis, and that's pretty bad, and that's very, very risky, especially if you're dealing with large sums of money, let alone large sums of money that isn't yours, especially if you're some sort of investment type of person, which I was. Alright, next item I'm going to be going over is identifying demand. Alright, so throughout this lesson here, you'll see we're going to be covering the supply and demand picture, and we're going to be addressing each item in its own kind of little section. Alright, so in order to identify demand, we have to know the game and its mechanics. We have to know how certain things work, how certain ships are fitted. You have to know that they exist and basically where they fit in the more general meta. And we need to know that so that we can make a conclusion as to whether it's an item or module, ship, or anything like that that would be useful for some type of player. Now, I guess we can probably make that statement that, oh, all the ships are usable. Sure, they are usable, but some are more usable than others. So we have to identify items that would have a lot of market action considering their volume. And something to consider also is a space-specific consideration. So what do I exactly mean by that? Certain things are better suited for PieSec, NullSec, LowSec, wormholes. It's just the way it is. However, of course, there are certain ships that work well based on their role across all types of space. For example, exploration ships, dedicated exploration ships, things that can fit a covert ops cloak, things that are bonus for scanning modules, scanning probes, things like that. They do work across the board as far as the different types of space out there, because they're actually more role specific, not necessarily space specific. So things that can be space specific are, like, for example, things that can only work in NullSec, such as Cynos. We can probably use capitals as an example, but it works in NullSec and LowSec. Alright. Things that work well in wormholes would be Tech 3s. They're quite popular in wormholes just because of the very flexible nature of the ships, right? So when you're starting to create this picture of certain types of ships or certain types of modules that would be more useful in one space or another, that gives you an idea of how popular they'll be based on the general population in that space. So if you're looking for something that would be a really good all-around ratting ship in NullSec, that's not a capital, and you intend to trade that item, you'll probably have a pretty easy way to get buy orders on that, or at least a pretty reasonable method of flipping that, maybe if not daily, maybe weekly, because of just the sheer popularity of it. If it's popular, a lot of people use it, a lot of people use it, a lot of people will eventually lose it, right? Alright, next item will be PvE versus PvP focus and its scope of use. Basically, in general, PvE items tend to sell a lot more in terms of volume, not necessarily price per unit, but definitely volume. Simply because there's a lot more PvE activities going on in the game versus PvP activities, generally speaking. And there are a lot of crossover type of modules. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of crossover modules. There's a lot of crossover ships. So for PvE specifically, what I've found a good amount of success in is shield items for the most part. Anything shield, shield boosters, shield amplifiers, ships that, I mean, I'll be honest, I mean, Caldari ships do very well for PvE for the most part. Because of this sheer volume that they have in the market, it's pretty easy to actually capture them on buy orders and then flipping them for profit. Now, that doesn't mean that PvP items are see less action in the market. That's not actually the case. Due to the nature of those crossover, more so on the modules end, you tend to see high volume on, say, things like medium shield extenders, damage controls. In general, propulsion modules do very well as a PvP and PvE item. As long as you can determine the type of player that will be using it, someone who's into PvE or PvP, you can have a better idea of how the demand will be in the long run. Concerning PvE, because it has to happen, right? Especially if I mean, think about it for your own purposes. If you're a player and my main source of income is ratting, then I have to have a ratting ship. I cannot not have a ratting ship, otherwise I'm not making money. So I will almost always have a PvE ship ready to go, and that may not be the case for PvP. I may actually not maintain a PvP ship at the ready, even if I was in nullsec. It's quite common to actually just pick that stuff up on contracts anyway, due to the nature of changing doctrines and changing staging systems, etc. All right. But another thing to consider to identify the potential demand of an item is skill requirement. Is this item usable by alphas, or are they usable only by omegas? Now, why is that important? If it's something that's usable by alphas, that means it will also be usable by omegas. All right. So let me give you guys an example. If I had to choose between putting down money on buy orders for meta modules versus Tech 2 modules, I will almost always pick meta modules, simply because of the daily volume that the market goes through on meta modules. Now, the price per unit and therefore the eventual profit per unit may be a lot lower than Tech 2 modules. Just the volume just simply outpaces it. Right? There's simply more people that would be able to use meta modules versus Tech 2. And again, that's just something that you'll have to understand and basically accept that volume is king. When it comes to markets, when it comes to trading, volume is king. it just is. It just is. And last thing on this section I'm going to be talking about is functionality versus price point. So what do I mean by that? There are certain things that I kind of fell for this trap as well when I was a lot earlier in my trading career. Certain things have have a very generous margin when you're looking at between buy and sell on the same item, right? A lot of times that great disparity between buy and sell orders actually is born on kind of like that balance between functionality and price point. Now, a pretty stark example of this would be things like, let's say, plus 5% hardwiring modules. So what are those exactly? Those are basically implants that give you 5% bonus on a particular attribute. It can be 5% damage on certain weapon types, or 5% more effectiveness on your afterburners, or something like that. So those are kind of like the high end of the module of the implants that can give you stat bonuses. When you're looking at buy and sell orders for those items, they tend to be pretty big margins. However, they're not nearly as popular as, say, the plus 4% or plus 3% module or implants, simply because they're just cheaper. They're just plain old cheaper. People will be more comfortable buying the cheaper item that gives them some bonuses versus the one that gives them max bonuses, but it just doesn't. For a lot of times, the extra money you have to pay just simply isn't justified. So you have to be careful, and you have to be realistic of, hey, is this something that actually would be usable by a lot of people, not just onesie twosies? You can always play that onesie twosie game, but it's so feast or famine. Some people are okay with that, but hopefully you can identify what particular game, what particular market style you're more comfortable with as you progress through this activity. Alright, so this is where it gets a little bit more information heavy. So I'm going to be talking about the supply picture. Now, why is this important? Knowing where the stuff comes from is very, very important. That is the single greatest indicator of how the price trend will be, apart from stat changes, or things being buffed or nerfed. All right, how things are made will affect how they will be priced. There's just no going around it. That's just the math behind it, the super basic math behind it. All right, so we're gonna talk about these things in a very general manner. All right, so for the most part, there are 3 types of production in the game: Tier 1 production, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Now, what are the differences between these, and how does that affect pricing? So Tier 1, think of Tier 1 as needing just raw materials to create, for example, a frigate. So when you're building frigates, that's Tech 1 production. When you're building Tech 1 propulsion modules, that's Tech 1 production. Right? And technically, capital building is also Tech 1 production, because you only need the raw material, the minerals of. Now we're talking capital constructions very specifically here. You need minerals. You turn them into components, which is still technically Tech 1, and then those components will then become a capital ship. So it's all falls under Tech 1 production. So if you are aware of the general price trends of minerals, if you're aware of the mining scene, you're gonna have a good idea of how prices are gonna move throughout the year. Now for Tech 2, this gets a little tricky because there's actually RNG involved in this type of production. Now, where does the RNG come from? The RNG actually comes from the ability to use Tech 2 blueprints for your production. Alright, so the act of creating a Tech 2 blueprint is called invention. There can be failures in inventing. Alright, so it's a skill-based thing, and it is impossible to always get it 100% of the time. Yes, it is mathematically impossible. The game will not allow it. So what does that mean? There will always be at some point loss. You have to account for the loss of not being able to create the Tech2 blueprint copy as a cost of operations. It's just the way it is. All right. So now you have the barrier of lost blueprint copies and the inherent SP barrier. Not everyone is. This isn't necessarily a common skill to train. Not Tech2. Because it's quite challenging to actually be very good at Tech2 production as far as the different types of modules. Because if you were to basically lay out the skill requirements to be able to produce anything Tech2, ships, modules, anything like that, man, you're looking at several months worth of training on a single character without using skill injectors. All right, so it's quite intensive. All right. Now moving on to Tech 3, what's that all about? So Tech 3 production is basically the ability to create Tech 3 cruisers, the ability to create Tech 3 destroyers. So the one thing that's very one thing that I also forgot to talk about Tech 2 production is you're gonna need moon materials. So you're gonna need raw minerals, and you're gonna need moon materials to create the Tech 2 items. Now for the Tech 3, think of it this way: if you were to live in a wormhole and you were able to do all the PvE type of activities, gathering type of activities in a wormhole, you would be able to do Tech 3 production. So that's just kind of the way that system works. So what's actually inside a wormhole that allows you to create Tech 3 items? So you have the PI that's inherent to the moons there. You have you can mine there, so that's minerals. Also, there's gas sites in there, gas anomalies that you harvest, and the gas that you get, you process them into items that can then be used to produce the components needed for Tech 3 production. Alright. So I know I just went over that very quickly and kind of in a very generalized manner, but if you are serious about trying to identify price swings for items, definitely identify what kind of item is it. Is it a Tech 1 item? Is it a Tech 2 item? Is it a Tech 3 item? And teaching yourself the types of indicators to look at based on those items will be key in identifying future price swings. Alright, next thing would be consider the nature of the respective raw materials needed. Alright, so this kind of goes back to different types of production. So if you can have a good idea of the things that happen to those raw materials that affect its price, alright. So minerals, where do the minerals come from? They come from ores. Ores could be found basically from high sec all the way to null sec. Alright, so what are the types of different things that could influence the price of those ores? For the most part, it's all about manpower. Are there enough people willing to go out there and mine in volume? So if there are, say, so let's go over some pretty common things that's changed, not so recently, but rather big changes when they did come up, would be, let's say, the Rorqual changes. The Rorquals really changed the mining game a lot. So nullsec now began really extracting a whole lot of minerals because of the Rorquals. They were just buffed so massively that you'd be, if you were even a halfway serious miner, you'd be crazy to at least not consider training into a Rorqual. They were that powerful. Okay, so why does that matter? Now it matters because now basically there's this glut of minerals. Like maybe a month or two after people got used to using the Rorqual, so there's just this glut of minerals that just flooded the market. Just boom, things got cheaper. Think about it that way. Just things got cheaper. Now it didn't really stay cheap. That's kind of one of the key items there. It didn't stay cheap. So think of it this way. So in nullsec, a lot of people have switched to Rorqual mining. So all your players who were previously focused on ratting have now focused their characters into mining. And now we're mining a lot. We're mining so much that the price of minerals are dropping. Well, that's not good. So what do we do with that? Well, if you're in an organized and large null entity, what you probably did was refocus your harvested minerals into cap production. That's pretty realistic. So things like that. So now we kind of now we thought about Tech 1 minerals and redirecting those efforts in order to combat the dropping in price due to the added supply. All right, good to go. So you need to kind of think about it that way. Basically try to retrace the story of how things are made. Okay, if you can do that, man, then you can identify prices. Now, kind of along the same lines of that example we just gave, we got these refineries coming up here in a few months. So how is that going to change things? Well, there's basically no precedence to this, so it can really be anything. However, I think it's safe to assume that there will be added volatility on the Tech 2 market, Tech 2 modules, Tech 2 ships, because the very nature of how moon materials are extracted is changing. So that's a fair bet. Now, if you're listening to this, is there anything you can do about that? I'll be honest with you, if you haven't done anything about it by now, you're kind of really late to the party. All right. So what you should have gone, or what you should have thought about, should have been something like this. We're changing the extraction of moon materials. Moon materials leads into Tech 2 production, and Tech 2 production is very popular. Tech 2 modules and Tech 2 ships are very popular, not just at the PvE level, but the PvP doctrinal level as well. What I should have done, or what you should have done, is identified moon materials that probably were trending low and bought them up in volume. Something like that, right? Something along those lines should have been something that you have acted on, based on news about the game as far as an update. All right, so think about it that way. Tech 3, I don't foresee a whole lot of stuff changing with that. I don't think that the reprocessing capabilities of the refineries in wormholes is going to change. The supply dynamic of the polymers in wormholes, not a whole lot, I don't think, but I may be wrong, but to me, I think Tech 3 will remain unchanged. Alright, next thing to consider, reprocessing and structure requirements. You don't always get to just use the raw materials and produce something with it. You can get away with that with Tech 1. However, for Tech 2 and Tech 3, the raw materials must be processed into a secondary item or a component, and then it's those components that are then made into whatever the final product is. Alright, so I'm going to give you an example. Let's talk about Tech 2 for a second. So for Tech 2, if you were to pull up the list of materials needed to create, say, a Tech 2 frigate, you would need the minerals to make the Tech 1 variant, and you would need moon materials to make to react into advanced smooth materials, which then lead to the creation of Tech2 components, which then lead to the creation of the Tech2 chip, while simultaneously using the Tech1 variant as an input. I'm sorry I don't have a picture for that, but it's basically more added steps. You have to identify, if you want to identify price trends in the future, be knowledgeable on the items needed to make the final product. Now, you don't necessarily have to know every single bit of information, but if you can at least identify, oh, you know what, that's kind of low for its average price. I might want to buy some extra of that and sell it later, or hold on to it and do my own production, let's say, several weeks from now. Something like that. Be familiar at least with the pricing. Be familiar of how much of this stuff typically gets into the market as far as volume is concerned. All right, that's something to consider. Structure requirements, that's kind of interesting. So that's really interesting, especially in this time of citadels. Before you you can basically get away. Actually, no, I shouldn't even say that. Before citadels, it was almost always better to build in a POS, in a player-owned starbase, because of the bonuses involved with production. The same goes with the citadels. We have engineering complexes that are specifically bonus for production, for industry. And when you're making these calculations, you have to actually use numbers as if they were reflecting production in an Asbel or Sotillo or something like that. Okay, because that would be the way mass production people would actually conduct their operation. To do it in NPC stations, not outposts, but NPC stations, I would say more often than not that you're actually not going to be reaching profit levels because of the added taxes. It's a really good chance that you're actually going to be building at a loss if you do your building in NPC stations. Now, that's not always the case, but I think more often than not that will be the case. So when you're thinking about the supply picture, the production picture, don't forget to think about the citadel aspect of it, the actual where stuff is built aspect. Because then another angle that you may have to actually consider when you do that is there someone out there that's doing a lot of builds in a citadel, and whoop, lo and behold, their citadel is now at war, or their citadel is now being attacked because they just been a war deck. So that's not good. That's potentially a loss of all those jobs if that citadel owner cannot protect his structure. All right, something to consider. All right, and the last thing we're going to be going over for the supply picture is the faction and loot drop based items. Now, why is this important? Because so far, all we've talked about is how Tech 1, Tech 2, and Tech 3 items are born and delivered into the market. Now, those are not the only items that are available in game for sale and for use. We also have Navy and pirate faction ships and modules. All right, those things don't go through traditional production lines. They actually are either created from LP conversions from either faction warfare or traditional mission running, or their BPs, their faction BPCs are actually derived from anomalies or combat sites in nullsec or lowsec, or just wherever they're available, and they are dropped as part of the loot table. A lot of times they won't always drop, at least on the lower end anomalies. So again, there's the RNG aspect of it, right? So their rarity adds to the price, not the build price, but the rarity of the blueprint copy itself is what adds value to the final product there. All right, hopefully I didn't lose you guys by now, but let's move on to the next topic here. All right, next one I'm going to be going over is material logistics and other motivation. All right, a lot of times when people are trying to think about how things move around, how things make it to JITA or Amara or anything like that, a lot of times people don't consider the hauling aspect. So throughout that whole process, if you think about it, right, throughout that whole process, from mining to production, there's a lot of hauling that actually has happened. Haulers that are on site in the mining belt, haulers that take that ore to the station to be processed, or let's talk about a more expanded picture of this. So we just talked about how rorquals do a lot of mining, right? But though for the rorqual pilots that just do the mining and they just want to be paid in cash, which is the majority of rorqual pilots, they just want to mine. They don't want to be bothered about the whole production line. They just want to get paid. I will probably end up selling my stuff to either someone in Alliance, right? Or I can haul all that ore, compress it first, of course, and sell it back to HiSec. Because you know what? There's especially if I'm producing or I'm harvesting all these ores, I'm probably gonna have a harder time selling it in nullsec where it's so abundant. I may have a better chance to get a little bit more profit out of this if I actually somehow either jump freight that stuff back to HiSec or use my rorqual as a way to actually, you know, move that stuff back. Now from there, I just basically plopped all those compressed ores into, say, JITA, and now someone's gonna buy all that stuff. And then from there, now they're gonna have to physically move, potentially, those compressed ores, take them to a refining citadel, right, with a citadel with refining bonuses, turn them into minerals, and then move those same minerals to maybe another citadel, or the same one, but let's say it's a different one, move to another citadel that's bonus for production. And then now that person will make something out of it, they'll make battleships out of it, something like that, right? And now those battleships that have just been produced using my ores will now have to then go back to JITA. So that very, very simple production line, that's a Tech 1 production line, involved a lot of moving, a lot of hauling, a lot of M3 being moved from point A to point B. Those things add cost. It's very difficult to determine cost on them sometimes, or to even think of them as something that needs to be counted as cost, because we don't think of hauling equaling ISK. It's free. Oh, I'm just gonna use my hauler. It's free. It's free. Like, no, it's not free. Nothing is free. You do something, you're needing to. I would hope that you'd want to get some sort of compensation for your time. Otherwise, I mean, you could just give me your money, I guess, and because you don't value your time. A lot of people don't think of it that way. Now the next item here, locally sold or exported, we kind of talked about that with our example. Okay. In the case of Faction BPCs, value is tied to rarity. We talked about that already. And mass production operations rely on imported goods. How does this change supply dynamic game-wide? Alright, so we kind of touched on this already. But one thing I want to reiterate on this concept is a lot of the more serious production guys will use multiple characters, operate out of multiple types of space, have haulers, etc. And the guys that are really, really good don't do it on their own. They may have friends that they produce items with, or they are backed by their alliance or corporation or what have you. All right, as part of like a mining program or a buyback program of some sort for a large agnostic alliance. All right. So when you're thinking about how things how the price of things may change in the future, think about how easy it would be for a group to do it. If it's too cumbersome for a group to do it, that it's more physically efficient to do it as a solo person, there's gonna be a price disparity between buy and sell order on the final product. Almost always. Tech 3 is a really good example of this. Because of the varied nature of wormholes, it's very difficult to actually organize in a large scale way Tech 3 production. Personally, I have done Tech 3, and I couldn't imagine like kind of divvying the jobs to different people, even in my own corp, because of the very random nature of the wormhole itself. All right. Yeah, because it's got something to do with reliable hauling lines, you know, and that's just not the case in wormhole space. You're not always going to have an exit that's close to JITA. You're not always going to have an exit that's close to where you refine your stuff or what have you. All right. So that randomness makes it less attractive as a dedicated group activity, unfortunately, for some people. I couldn't find value in it, to be honest. All right. So this is a really good question, and something that we seek to answer every time we're in the market, right? Will an item increase in value over time? Well, depending on your time horizon, so your time horizon being the period of time in which you intend to operate in, depending on how long that is, the question of valuation may not be that relevant. So what do I mean by that? So let me give you an example. So a trader that's super active on 4+ hours a day. Every time he's on, he literally just adjusts orders in JITA. Just one ISK adjustments all day, every 10 minutes. So that guy right there, he doesn't care about valuation over 6 months or to a year of an item. All he cares about is how much does it cost right now, because I'm just trying to flip it right now. Okay. So there's that. All right. So if you're not that intraday trader, valuation is important, because I don't want to get caught where I capture something on buy orders, but for reasons that I unfortunately didn't take into consideration, now the value is decreasing, and now I'm stuck with this item. And believe it or not, that's happened to me several times, actually. And 9 times out of 10, I just have to suck up that loss. I can't do anything with it, you know. Now, with that being said, with the problem of valuation, have a plan for both scenarios. What are you going to do if the price increases? Well, that's easy. Just as soon as you capture on buy, flip it to sell. Easy. Now, what if it decreases in value? Well, short of sucking up the loss, one thing you could do if it decreases in value, think about this in a universal way. If something decreases in value in JITA, let's say, I'm going to give you an example. So this is actually a fairly recent example. Small ancillary armor wrappers. They were a hot commodity for like 2 years, 2+ years, easy. Ever since they were introduced. At one point they were selling upwards of 5 million ISK per unit on a single module that frigates use, right? Now in the last 4 to 6 months, they've decreased in value because CCP finally adjusted the drop rate of the BPC needed to build them. They basically flooded the system with all these BPCs. So now the small ancillary armor wrappers cost, I believe they're in the neighborhood of 200 to 300,000 ISK. Okay. So with such a sharp decrease in value, what could I have done to actually uh, combat that? What I could have done, once I noticed that the price is starting to consistently drop in JITA, this is actually what I did. Look into other hubs. Look into high-sec border market hubs around faction warfare space, something like that. The items sold in places like that tend to be quite isolated from the pricing of larger hubs simply because of the geography involved. It's just, if I live there, which I did, or I still do, I have no problem paying, 10-15% over JITA prices for something that I can get right now. No problem at all. All right. So that's an example of being able to still recover your profit even though the value of an item is decreasing. Okay. Now with enough observation and game knowledge, you can predict price shifts. So that's kind of been we've gone over that item several times throughout this lesson. And I just simply cannot stress that enough. You gotta know how the game works. You have to know how players behave. If you can wrap your head around that, then the actual market stuff is actually really easy, because then it simply becomes mechanical at that point. You're no longer analyzing it because you inherently know it by then. And once you get to that point, it's just adjusting prices, honestly. And finally, putting the entire picture together, consider the opportunity cost for you. All right. So throughout this whole lesson, we've been talking about how things are made, how that relates to the value of an item, the hauling, the different types of production, etc. So even after having discussed all that stuff, the question still comes back to you as, all right, now that you know that, what would you rather do? Would you rather just trade that item, or would you rather actually produce the item and trade the input materials to create the item? Well, that's up to you. What's the opportunity cost to you? What do you find more value in, time or ISK? And just act appropriately. That's really all it is. A lot of people, and if you've been around the game long enough, I think you at one point or another were this person. I'm going to mine like a crazy person several hours a night. I'm going to take that ore and I'm going to build stuff with it, and then I'm going to sell it for a profit. I am almost certain your first 10 production runs did not yield you any profit, because you were thinking that the minerals you mined were free. You didn't think of them as having ISK value. And that's terrible. that's bad. Don't do that. You have to be able to articulate some sort of price for activities. You have to be able to articulate some sort of price for using your time. All right. Otherwise, guys like me are just I'm gonna outcompete you. I will basically work you out of the market because you're gonna be out of money. I'd prefer if that didn't happen. I'd prefer you stick around the market and actually play, because it's very rewarding. But you have to identify opportunity costs. You actually have to ensure that you're getting something out of it. If you're not making money but you're okay with just doing the activity because you genuinely enjoy it, hey, that's cool too. All right, but you need to be able to extract something out of the activity. Otherwise, you may not feel motivated to stick around. All right, so that's our lesson there. All the stuff to consider before we get into the actual chart work. All right, so to recap, we just went over how things are valued, where things come from, and how they affect prices. We gave examples along the way, and finally we wrapped it all up by giving you the question of what's the value to you, what's the opportunity cost to you. All right, because that opportunity cost basically gets passed down along the line all the way up until the item makes it to JITA. All right. And that's important because you need to know whether you're getting a good deal or not. You need to know whether this buy order is a good idea, because I know the price will bounce back because of whatever facet of demand it happens to fall under. All right. So hopefully this wasn't too confusing. Hopefully I was able to provide you guys with some information about trading and markets in EVE. And I hope to continue with these lessons here. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you learned something. And as far as our next topic here, we'll probably go into some actual chart work, some actual pictures, pictures and photoshopped items to look at. Now that once we have identified that an item is a good buy, like I said, because of the demand and how easily it can be supplied, and now we want to buy it. So that's kind of the next step, identifying where to at what price point to actually buy it and at what price point to actually sell it. So that's going to be the next lesson, guys. So hopefully I'll actually be able to deliver that in the next few days after uploading this video. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. I'm Rodin, and you just received a lesson on markets from markets in EVE Online, and hopefully I'll be able to deliver another lesson to you guys here in the next couple of days. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.